Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am Matt Williamson, and you are watching Pop Goes the 60s. And today I have a special guest, a returning guest, Glenn Greenberg. Glenn, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always just a gas to be here.
Well, good to
So
have you. And as you may remember him from doing these bookazines every, well, maybe once a year, once every other year, and he's got a new one out. And this is called The Beatles in America, the Touring Years. And one of the things that I wanted to bring him on here, and I when I got a copy of this, I was very pleased to see how this was written because there's a couple things going on here that I've talked about recently, and that is the lack of physical media from the Beatles, from the corporation that we know as Apple, and how do we reach new fans? And this kind of answers both of those things. So why don't you tell us how it came to be? And again, this is one in a string of several bookazines you've done on the Beatles.
yeah, I've done four. This is my fifth, and it really came about. It was the beginning of the new year, and I reached out to my editor on all of the previous bookazines, Bob Durr, and I just to wish him a happy new year, and I said I hope we can work together again in the near future. And he got back to me within a day or so, and he said, "Listen, I've got a bookazine here. As if this can work in your schedule, it's yours if you want it." And he said, "It's the Beatles in America, the touring years." He says, "If you can make this work in your schedule," he says, "the outline is already figured out. We know the parameters that we want to work in." He said, "But you can take it from there." And I just dove in. We had like a 30 to 45 minute conversation, Bob and I, just sort of like to get the lay of the land and throwing out ideas back and forth to each other. And I was taking notes about stuff that I absolutely had to include and stuff that would have been nice to include. And we were going back and forth. I was rattling off all of the sources that I have in my home library that I could just immediately go to and just jump right into this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Early April here, mid-April, and that is a very tight turnaround.
Yeah, this was early January where the conversation began, and I was at work within a week.
Mm.
Within a week, I was researching and writing, and yeah, and the book came out last week, April 10th. But between all of the video stuff that I've got, all the books that I've got, I looked at this outline, which was very general, and I knew exactly how to add to it.
Mm.
And that's how it came about. In terms of why this particular topic, we never talked about it. But my theory, and I guess I could always pick up the phone and ask him, is my theory is that this marks the 60th anniversary of the end of their touring years. And
Oh yeah,
so
that's
I don't know
right.
if, yeah, I don't know if they were looking at it in terms of an anniversary kind of thing. Maybe it's just serendipity, but for me, that's as good a rationale as any
Hmm.
to do this now.
Well, one of the things I wanted to tell the viewers right up front, I know what I thought when I said this. Well, okay, again, we're going to get more Beatles, U.S. tour stuff. And when I read this, folks, this had stuff that I hadn't known. So that's a great compliment to Glenn. There's some stuff in here, and the photos are incredibly good. So this is one of those things that you'll be able to find and pick up. And I think it's written not only for entry level and casual fans, but it's also written for longtime fans like myself. So I found myself getting things out of it. So I want to say that right up front, so you don't think this is just some very what would you say, some just quickie cash in on the Beatles. This is not. I mean, this is really well written, and we'll go into some of the things that it talks about briefly here. But I was very impressed with the photography.
Me too, because I write these things. I don't know what the images are going to be when I'm writing them. And so you just kind of have to hope that the people on the editorial and photo and design end are just going to be able to find the images that will work with the text. For the most part, I'm really happy with all of the bookazines that I've done with this team. I've never been as impressed as I am with this one. When I got to see the proofs right before the book went out, I did one last sort of proofread just to copy edit and all that kind of stuff. And I was blown away. I was like, first of all, I've never seen a lot of these photos before. That was the most impressive thing. And the fact that these photos worked so well with the text. And it wasn't like it wasn't designed that way. I mean, I just wrote what I wrote. and they managed to find photos that complemented the text beautifully. I think it's a perfect marriage of text and images.
Well, luckily, the Beatles were one of the most photographed
Yeah,
groups around or of entities around of the time. So
yeah,
they were able to match up whatever you wrote about. So
yeah.
that was impressive. So I'll be showing some of the photos during through this video here. But
Great.
one of the things that I also thought of is because when the Beatles released something officially of this period, it was that Beatles 64 video that came out about a year and a half ago, which I thought was
Yeah.
just a load of crap. And this is more of what this does them justice. Let's just put it that way.
I I have no words. I'm really blown away by that. I remember your video about Beatles 64. For me, the experience is a little colored by the fact that I got to go to the world premiere
That's
at the
right. I remember you saw McCartney there, didn't you?
McCartney was about
Yeah.
20 feet behind me with Olivia Harrison, Sean Lennon, and was I don't think Ringo or Barbara were there, but definitely Paul was there, and Nancy, uh, Sean Lennon, and Olivia Harrison. And I was pinching myself the whole time. And the whole time I was watching the movie, I was like, "What's Paul thinking right now? How's Paul reacting to this?" So that experience was a little. Oh, and I got to meet Jack Douglas after the
Oh, you
movie, and
did? Okay.
we ended up talking for about. So for me, that experience was just incredible. I would have to watch the movie again now, removed from that evening, to have a more objective perspective on it.
Yeah, I hate to rain on your parade, but those
Yeah,
are two completely different things. Being in the presence of those guys at the event, that's
yeah,
one thing, and I'm
yeah,
sure my I would be colored by that as well if I had that
yeah.
opportunity. So you can't take that away from you. So that's also very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I glanced at that movie while I was doing the research for this book, but the one that I found much more um, useful and much more substantial was the documentary the Beatles, the first U.S. visit,
Mhm.
which a lot of stuff was reused in Beatles 64,
Correct.
but I just found that the first U.S. visit was just more useful for my purposes.
The thing I liked about the bookazine here, the Beatles in America, is that it has a really nice list of the tour dates. It's very
Yes.
concise, the cities, and it's very well laid out. It's very easy to read, and it's very classy looking too. So we can go over that. But one of the things that there were a few things here I'll mention that I found interesting that I don't remember knowing. If I had heard them, I certainly didn't retain it, but it really jumped out at me now. But when you were writing this, what were some of the challenges you had to try to get some new information that wasn't already repeated many times?
I looked everywhere I could find. I looked for contemporary news sources, newspaper articles, reviews. Um, Boy, I mean, that was probably the biggest challenge and probably the cause of the biggest headaches. And yet when I did find the stuff that I was looking for, I was like euphoric, because I didn't want it to just be a regurgitation of what you could see in Beetle 64 or the anthology. I wanted to get a more honest account. I wanted to get more obscure facts. So I looked for books that are not they're a bit more off the beaten path, you know. One of the books that I thought was really helpful was called the Beatles Progress by Michael Braun, which
Hmm.
came back into print. I mean, that was the book that was written. He was on tour with the Beatles in 64.
Hmm.
And so that came back into print, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And it was the book that John Lennon said was the most accurate and honest book about them. It showed them who as they really were. So when it came back into print, I snatched it right up. I don't know if it's still in print. It might already be out of print, but that was really helpful in terms of getting um, uh, uh, fly on the wall kind of observances. Um, there's a great sequence in there, which if I knew about this, I forgot about it. But the fact that when they were flying over to America, Paul is confiding in someone on the plane saying, what is America? don't what doesn't America already have that we can bring them? He goes, are we really going to be a hit in America? They've, this is where it all came from. What can we give back to them? And he's confiding all this in Phil Spector,
Mm. I didn't
which I
realize,
didn't.
I didn't know he was on the plane with them.
He was on the plane with them. He was flying to America from England. Yeah. So that's in the Michael Braun book.
Ah.
So I was like, wow, this is going in there.
Yeah, I've got the Braun book and I started reading it about a year ago and I never finished it. So I got to
Oh,
get back to it.
okay.
I've always got books on my bedside and there's always
Mhm.
stuff I'm shuffling around. So that is, but that Lennon did really appreciate the treatment in that book.
Yeah.
And I think it is very good. Yeah, so I like overall the Beatles in America bookazine here. It is it's basically, I mean, these bookazines are almost like a coffee table book with a soft cover, is how I would explain them.
Yeah.
Because it's gives a lot of depth with not a ton of words. So the word count on this, I don't know that that matters to the viewers, but it's about 52 pages. So it's a real comfortable length and plenty of photos. But uh, I know it's always a struggle. They're always making you reduce your words. You had so much more to put in here. About how much was left on the cutting room floor, do you think?
Oh boy. Well, I've gotten really good at these. When I was first doing them, I just was sort of like, it was painful. It was really, really painful. And if I couldn't make the cuts, they would, the editorial
Yeah.
team. I've gotten really good at editing myself. I think that's one of the best things that's come out of me doing these is that it's gotten to the point where I hit the word count, and if they have to go even further, like shorten the text even further, it really isn't to the degree where I'm really tearing my heart out, that where I would feel like I'm
Mhm.
missing a lot because I'm giving them really the right amount that they need. All of the main cuts were made by me, so I could live with them. So I would say that in terms of what's missing, it's funny. I have a couple of anecdotes. Is one of the things that my editor Bob and I talked about. He reminded me of the fact that George was the first Beatle to come to America before
Hmm.
before they came in February '64. He was here in September '63 visiting his sister. And he said that would be a great way to, that would be a great thing that a lot of people probably don't know. And it gives a different perspective for George that he was here before fame and he could compare what it was like, when he came the second time. And so I wrote it and it was supposed to be in the first chapter and it didn't fit. So I took it out. And then I intended to have it in the second chapter and it didn't fit. And I took it out. And it kept going, going, going until I got to the last chapter and somehow I made it work. So somehow, and so you get to the end of touring, the chapter that's specifically about the end of touring, and it starts off with George having this really specific perspective of what it was like to visit America pre-fame and how he's feeling by 1966. So it worked, even though it wasn't originally supposed to go there, but it was just because there was just so much stuff I had to get into the other chapter. So that was one thing that I did make work. The only other thing that I can really say that I really missed having in there was in the 1965 chapter, um, when they met Elvis, and John had a lot to say about meeting Elvis. Some of it was very positive and very flowery. And one of the quotes that I managed to get in was he said, he didn't have much to say. It was a great experience, but he was inarticulate. That's all. So I managed to get that in. But what I had found, this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier in terms of like really trying to do a deep dive. I found that there was a quote from John when they got back to England after the 65 tour. He told the New Musical Express that meeting Elvis was rubbish. It was like meeting Engelbert Humperdinck. And I was like, oh, this is going in there. And unfortunately, the editorial team had to cut it out purely for space because I looked at the chapter with a fine tooth comb. It's like, okay, sure, maybe you can cut something out to make room for it, but what? And They, as the editorial team, couldn't find it. I, as the writer, couldn't find it. And it fell into the category of there's need to know and nice to know. And this fell into nice to know.
Mhm.
So that was probably the most painful cut, but I understood why it had to be done.
Well,
Um,
folks, you got an
yeah,
exclusive here on Pop Goes the 60s. That's not in the book you're about to buy. There, you get it only here. So
that's right.
thanks for that, Glenn. But yeah, so it covers all 3 years touring.
Yeah.
And did you have a favorite year, or was there a harder year to write about as we get to the end of the touring? It's not like unlike the end of the Beatles, really, because there's certainly a downswing in that
Yeah.
1966 year. So were you trying to keep things lighter? Was there any kind of consistency you wanted to keep through, or was there a goal to kind of show the downswing of the touring years?
You know what? For me, I just let the facts take me where they wanted me to go. I just sat down and I researched and I gathered all the information for each tour and I sifted through it. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to focus on for each year? So for the 64, it was euphoria. It was the madness, the mania, so to speak. it
Mhm.
was it was just the newness of coming to America and getting caught up in it all, where they had to escape the hotel and go out and with the Ronettes, incognito, and go to Spanish Harlem where nobody would recognize them, kind of thing. That kind of madness, just the overwhelmingness of it all. With 65, um, I found that it was really about how do we do this again, but make it more palatable for us. And so you have fewer shows, and you have more downtime, and you have them, reclining by the pool at their house out in California, where the celebrities are coming to them. And so I was able to get into also the fact that there was some inspiration for some of their songs on the 65 tour, not so much on 64. So you get the famous Peter Fonda story.
Mhm.
And you get the fact that, I guess David Crosby and Roger McGuinn came to visit them, and I think Joan Baez and all that kind of stuff. So really with the 65 chapter, it was more about, how do we do this again without it being so grueling for us the first time? How do we sort of protect ourselves from that? Um, and so I get into that. And then with 66, it really was, there was like a dark cloud hanging over them. And I think that kind of permeates through my writing in that chapter. I would say I couldn't get it too heavily into the Philippines incident because that's not about them in America, but it weighed heavily upon them and carries over to when they get to America in the midst of the whole where the Beatles are more popular than Jesus uh, 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 interview, and so that's that they're contending with that, and so I made sure to put in the fact that people threw firecrackers towards the stage and they thought they were being shot at, and Brian Epstein was so nervous and so worried that he actually um, uh, offered to cancel the tour and pay for it out of his own pocket. To which John was all for it. John was fine with it. Um, and then ultimately, once Brian's perspective changed, John had to be convinced as well. No, no, we don't want to cancel the tour. We'll put too many people out of work. There's just too many other lives in the balance here that will be affected by this. And so John had to uh, uh, walk back those comments and basically apologize, which he very much did not want to do. That's one of the things I would have loved to have been able to get a little bit more into that in the 66 chapter. I felt like I got across what I needed to get across, but there's just so much more detail that I would have loved to have gotten into. But I think I pulled it off as well as I could with the space that I had.
Yeah, I mean, if you were just left to put in everything, I mean, you'd have a book then, essentially, and yeah, so I guess this totally works, and the Beatles are that never-ending, that bottomless well of fresh water, fresh things. That the deeper you go, the more there is there to
Yeah.
find. So I know what I know what it's like to try to keep things reined in, so you can get something out the door. And you had a deadline, so you made it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it also is just what makes it easy is, right, like 2 feet away from me is my whole Beatles library at home, and I knew exactly which sources to go to and where to look in those sources. So the research part was particularly easy this time. Maybe just because I've gotten better at it from going back to the John Lennon one, which is the first one I did, where I literally for weeks had stacks of books all over the floor of my living room, where I was like,
Hmm.
okay, where do I find it in this book? And where do I find it in this book? And here it was just much smoother. And like I said, I was able to gather all of the information for each year, for each tour, and jot down everything and just be able to sift through all those facts and figures and information and let those facts take me to what each chapter was going to be about. I was thrilled to find out how much they made on each tour, and be able
Hmm.
to include that those facts and figures in the book and show how much they made and how much that would be worth today, how much what that translates into in today's dollars. So that was great stuff. I mean, I was really happy to be able to include that.
Yeah, you usually that's not covered. That's almost never talked about how much money they're making, how much things actually cost them. It's
Yeah,
always kind of like, well, Brian takes care of that, and there's some kind of big juggernaut behind them. But I always find it interesting to find what things cost because that actually tells a great story.
yeah.
And there's decisions made behind the scenes based on the costs. And things happen. I mean, it's all about the money. If you're going to go on tour, it's about maximizing the dollars and your time on tour. So yeah, that I found very helpful.
And one of the things that my editor Bob really wanted me to get into, and it's one of the things that one of the pieces that he sort of gave to me that I really tried to run with is just the fact that by the second tour they had to go to bigger venues, open air, much bigger venues than the first time around, and they basically helped create arena rock to that extent, and a lot of it was according to Larry Kane, the radio the broadcast journalist who accompanied them on their first two tours. Um, like the police basically said to Brian Epstein, like, you can't do that. Yeah, you can't have like, a 5,000 seat stadium and 25,000 people outside wanting to get in. You're gonna, and so that kind of put the bug in Brian's ear to look bigger, think bigger, next time around. And so that was a theme that really I think carried throughout the book.
Yeah, so they could play fewer concerts and make even more money,
Exactly.
essentially. So, which makes sense. And if you couldn't hear him
Yeah.
anyway, it's kind of like I
Yeah.
think it's not unlike going to see McCartney today. People, from what they say, are they're not going to really listen to him sing so much as just, see a Beatle. And
Right.
that's exactly what was going on in the old days because weren't going to hear him anyway.
Right. Right. Well, now you can hear him. It's just it's not that great to hear.
Right,
Sorry, Paul.
exactly. Exactly.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, you have to, 80 years old plus,
Yeah,
it's what can you do?
exactly.
Yeah, so let me give you a couple things that I was impressed with in here that I really enjoyed hearing. And one was George Harrison and when his mother was pregnant with him. I didn't realize that they she was playing Indian music that was played was it a radio program, I think. And there's actually, so anyway, this connects with George's love for Indian music. Now, that may seem far-fetched, but there has been research done. If you're playing music to children in the womb, they are more musically adept. And there's the research is rather deep on that. I did not know his mother was playing him Indian music. No wonder it sounded familiar to him.
On a subconscious level, it may well have. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it might have just been a conscious level, actually. I think
On,
that's
on, on
what because I mean the baby's still there listening, just
Right,
inside, so it
right.
wouldn't be subconscious really, but conscious. And
Oh, okay.
I guess, and there was always this, George said it sounded very familiar to me, and he took right to it. So
Yes. Yeah.
that part that I had not read before, I couldn't remember it if I had, and that just made it all make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I was impressed too. Uh,
Yeah. So the other thing too, George Harrison, another very good quote. He was terrified when he saw the big crowds in '65 at the stadiums, but he said it was also, he never felt so exhilarated in his life.
yeah.
So Harrison was always probably the most dour of the Beatles across the board in any topic. But in this case, he also had some words that, I mean, the most exhilarating thing he had ever been through. I can't imagine having 50,000 or 40,000 people screaming at you, flashbulbs going out, and you can't even see the crowd. And, I just can't imagine that.
And he's seen them from above. Remember, they were flying over the stadium
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
helicopter. So yeah, one of the things that really as I was writing this and when I was finished, I realized just how much of a voice George has in this book, more so than any of the other Beatles books that I've done. Um, George really came, George just really shines through in this. There's just so much about him in here, and it was really odd that it was almost like I was scrambling to try to find stuff for John and Paul to do, to
Hmm.
give, because I just felt like George's voice was the one that was really um, the loudest, so to speak, here.
Yeah, I agree with you because I thought I was just maybe cherry picking the George stuff because I was just drawn to it. But
Yeah,
now that you say that, it does seem that he has a lot of input in this book, and he's
yeah,
got great quotes.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's part of this whole sort of reevaluation of George and his role in the Beatles. And for the, when it started, I was kind of like, yeah, come on, that's revisionism. But it's like having now written this, it's like, no, he really was, a major voice there. He's damn funny. He's got some terrific quotes, terrific stories, and he really did influence a lot of the decisions that they made because the decision to stop touring, as far as I know, based on the research that I did and based on what people have said and so forth, it started with him. I
Yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
John jumped on that sort of attitude, but George was apparently the first one to say, "Look, is this going to be an annual thing? I mean, is this really going to be part of what, part of our existence for the rest of our time together?" And he was the one who initiated the thought, maybe we should stop this.
And you go through some of the fans, the stampedes,
Yeah,
somebody there's a photograph. I hadn't seen this one, but a guy got on stage
right.
and snatched John's hat.
John's hat.
And this was getting too close for comfort here. And
Yeah,
when you see the fencing, it just seems like a border town. It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's not. It doesn't look safe. It doesn't feel good. It looks dangerous, and you
And
that gets covered in the book.
it got to the point where they had to perform in the rain, and the sound engineer guy basically said, well, listen, if they were playing in the rain, and it was basically like, well, if the amps start to spark, unplug your guitar, something like that. And there was a point where Paul, I mean, I think that was pretty much the last straw for Paul, where he's like, this is not worth, risking our lives. I mean, we're playing in the rain. We could get electrocuted, with this equipment. The amps could literally explode and, spark and explode and set us on fire. So I think apparently that was where Paul really sort of like fell in with the other guys. So it wasn't just the craziness of the fans. It was also literally like hazards in the workplace kind of thing.
Yeah, because it was such new territory to do a stadium concert.
Yeah, yeah,
And, the amps were very under, they were under amplified and they're trying to pipe it through the sound system of the ballparks, which
yeah.
was a joke. And they just didn't have,
And the
I don't
overhead
know what,
protection, the
yeah, that's
overhead
true.
protection for the yeah, to keep the rain from getting on them or the equipment
Hmm.
was not adequate. So I think I think that I get into enough of it in the book that you really get a sense that, this was a risk. This was not particularly safe conditions for them. Also, the fact that, like, as you were saying, like, the crowds were storming the field, and they were like getting up to the stage, and like you said, one guy jumped on the stage and grabbed John's hat, and it was crazy, and some of the crowds got downright dangerous. I mean, downright menacing.
Hmm.
I don't think they meant to, but how, when you're on the
Well,
stage and they're coming at you.
that's why they call it mania.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Harrison always referred to it his whole life as the mania that, and he used it as a negative term because
yeah,
people, the way he would describe it is that people were just out of control. And then, into the 70s, people were drunk. You had older people at the concert, so they were stoned and drunk and on uppers and all these different drugs and things, which made it a different kind of menacing. But with these, what I saw, when you see you've got the big baseball diamond and the stage is out kind of in the infield or whatever, you have all this space around it. So if somebody does get out, they can run for like a full minute or so, probably.
yeah,
And there's a lot of ground to cover to catch that one person. So
yeah,
it took a lot of people to really put police this and
yeah.
provide, I guess at the time was proper security because at the concerts, I mean, they had a long way to go to get to the Beatles, unlike the theaters, where
Hmm.
that one where John's hat was stolen. I think that was, I forget where that was. Do you recall where that was?
Oh boy.
I don't.
It
Anyway,
goes the
there's
internet
a
right out.
there's a photo of the hat coming off. That's an
Yeah,
incredible photo.
yeah,
Um,
that blew me away. That blew me
so
away when I wrote about it and I saw it right in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so it got really dangerous, and it's a shame. I've always felt that I wish they never had toured in '66. That we could have probably had another album. Yesterday and Today would have been a full album of new songs, probably. I
Oh
mean, we
wow.
would have had the time to probably do more music, or they could have, taken more vacation or
Right.
split the difference, because they
Yeah.
did like to work and write songs. But that's too bad. And I think they were, let's face it, man, they were chasing the money. And that's partly an Epstein thing. But that's his job, though. I mean, they're
Hmm.
trying to, that's where they made a lot of the big money. And, it got to the point where it just wasn't, the big money wasn't even worth it.
Right. I mean, and the Beatles tended to take a real, I mean, once they made a decision, they were very extreme about it. I mean, it's like, okay, you're going to give up touring because of that kind of madness. But 3 years later, where they were just going to, the talk was just to stage just one concert for a TV special. And George was just so against the whole idea of performing live with the Beatles again that he was a real sourpuss about it, and was grousing. I don't have to tell you, of all people, that scene in the Get Back documentary where he goes, "I don't want to go on the roof." I mean, it's right upstairs, and he
Yeah.
he didn't even want to do that
Yeah.
because he was so burned out on performing live with the Beatles, and it was like that. That's really extreme. I mean, that's really extreme.
Well, I think
Um,
they may have had a little post-traumatic stress syndrome going on,
Possibly.
because the dangers that they face, planes almost going down in a rainstorm and things like that. It all, I think, cumulatively at some point takes its toll. And then with 66, there's other bad things going on as well. So,
But and yet he did tour with Bonnie and Delaney, George.
he did, but that was a little different. Well, that's a different kind of group, and he was a kind of a sideman, so he could kind of.
Sure, sure.
So he was.
Yeah,
You're
I mean,
right. He wasn't opposed. I think the bottom line with Harrison, I think he was just opposed to touring with the Beatles.
yeah, yeah,
Period. Because he
yeah.
knew that, like I remember reading, it was on when Paul McCartney got married and obviously John eloped with Yoko. So Paul and
Yeah.
Linda get married, and the Beatles at that point, they would not go to the wedding because it just got too crazy if all the Beatles showed up. So
Hmm.
this is they started doing things on their own out of necessity, so they weren't overwhelmed by crowds.
I think George did go to the reception, I believe, for Paul.
Oh, could be. He wasn't at the ceremony. I
He
remember
wasn't at
him,
this.
he's
No.
quoted as saying, and this is in later years, he's saying, we just couldn't do that because, the people would just go nuts if we all showed up there, and it just was a bad scene.
Right, and the thing with John doing the with the Plastic Ono band in Toronto, it wasn't again same thing. He wasn't opposed to playing live. He was opposed to playing live with the Beatles. And my question, and this is something that I thought about for many many years before I ever knew I was ever going to write about the Beatles professionally, which was by 1969. Would there have been the kind of Beatlemania that there was in 64, 65? I mean, had they not maybe not have gone on tour, but even just performed one concert or two concerts,
Hmm. Yeah.
would there have been that kind of insanity that there was, or had their audience grown up along with them and would have been more sort of like keeping it cool?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you just said there. The audience had definitely grown up more. They probably, when you see like the Yellow Submarine premiere and so you have tons of people lining up and going to see it. And there are crowds.
Yeah,
However, it seems like the girls are older. There's
yeah,
no more, 12-year-olds really screaming. And I think that it would have been a big deal in the media. It just would have been the hype around everything, but it wouldn't have been, probably girls wetting themselves, It wouldn't
right,
have been that
right.
kind of crowd. So I don't know. The new crowd, I don't know how much better would have been. Maybe would have been more subdued.
Yeah, I
But
think so.
I
I've
don't know.
always
Like
thought so.
when Lennon did Toronto, obviously that wasn't the Beatles, so it was a lower key affair,
Right.
as was Delaney and Bonnie, and even McCartney's early touring in the universities with Wings. Those were, the Beatles could travel by themselves fairly easily, but
Mhm.
yeah, when it's together, it seemed like they didn't even want to. They were done done with that.
Yeah, obviously they didn't even want to take a chance. I never thought about it that this way until you mentioned it, post-traumatic stress disorder. I really didn't think about it that way, but that probably, at least with George, that probably was what, a lot had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, well, George, he's somewhat introverted in many ways, so it doesn't surprise me that he was the first to. I mean, that's why I figured out he's introverted because he's never wanting to play live. I mean, he did one tour as a solo act, he did one show in
Yeah,
Japan in '92. I mean, very, very limited stuff, and that's where his comfort zone was. So
yeah.
um, that's perfectly fine. So it's really tough to be
Hmm.
introverted if you're in the Beatles. Just ask Pete
Yeah.
Best, who was relieved of his duties for being too introverted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, there's a bookazine for you, Pete Best. Last surviving Beatle. Could it be? I don't
I'll run it up the flagpole. But
know.
there are others I'd rather do that haven't gotten the approval. So that
Yeah.
might be an uphill climb. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's always fun to read about the Beatles and kind of resubmerge oneself in the mania, quite
Yeah.
frankly. I mean, um, even when, I didn't have very good things to say about Beatles 64, but the footage was great, and it's hard
Yeah.
to not get caught up in that period because everybody was so young and naive, and they were climbing, everything was just kind of reaching that peak, and it was fun for just about everybody,
Yeah.
and everybody was getting something out of it. So that doesn't go on forever, but us fans, even all these years later, 60 years after they toured, we're still talking about it.
Very much so. And what for me, one of the things that I try to really focus on was watching how the four of them interacted with each other because we know, they eventually break up and they're not very pleased with each other, and they say a lot of nasty things about each other, especially John and George towards Paul and all that. And I just wanted to see like how they related to each other, especially in the documentary stuff, um, where they're more off the cuff, where they're more candid, and the brotherhood between them is just really it's both heartwarming to see it and heartbreaking because you know where it's all gonna head.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things that I really focused on. It's one of the things I wish I could have gotten into in more depth, but it wasn't one of those things where there's a lot of retrospecting in there. It's very
Mhm.
much in the moment, so you
Yes.
don't really refer to anything in the future. Like even when I was talking, even when I mentioned Phil Spector, you know, I don't. I do mention the fact that he eventually will work on Let It Be. That's about as far as it goes in terms of looking ahead and forecasting beyond the limitations of the era that I'm writing about. So, but just from an observer's point of view and somebody covering this, I really was studying their interpersonal interactions. And like, I'll give you for example, I was watching the press conference where John was basically doing his mea culpa or apology for the more popular than Jesus comments. And what I found myself doing was watching Paul, watching John.
Hmm.
Like what's going through Paul's mind? How is he reacting? You know, and I don't know. Maybe I was reading into it a little bit, but I saw concern. I saw brotherly
Oh
concern.
yeah, yeah. I'm with you there. I mean, all three of those guys were really trying to support him as much as they could, and
Yeah,
they were carrying as much water from him as they could as well.
yeah,
And they knew what was at stake, and it was taken out of context, and it was
yeah.
blown out of proportion to a large degree because I think a lot of people didn't really know what he said. In fact, what he said, he he stole it from the book he was reading. It wasn't even his own original thought, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the irony of it.
Well,
So,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it was as these things go. I mean, it was just covered poorly, and then it's all this.
Right. And the other thing was there was a point where they were at an airport and a reporter was asking them, I think this was when they were coming to America and the Ku Klux Klan was threatening them and everything, and a reporter asked each of them, are you worried about it? And John gave a very sort of, frank answer. And then the reporter puts the microphone to Paul, and Paul just says, "It's going to be great." Well, 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 how do you know that, Paul? It's going to be great,
Very good.
And it
He's
was
the.
just you get why they were so great together
Mhm.
because they were opposites in many ways, and they did complement each other, and yeah, and Paul just has this grin on his face, like, of course I'm worried. Of course, but it's going to be great. It's going to be
Yeah,
great because it's got to be great. That
yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. They had to endure a lot of that and
Yeah.
put on the happy face and basically lie to the public because you had to keep appearances and keep positive because there was a tour on. If it was still going on and the show was still going on, the show must go on. So
Right.
you grin and bear it.
And Paul was just better at, you know, faking it than John was.
I think John was actually far better at faking it.
Really?
Yeah, he just didn't do it that often. But when he did it, there was nobody better.
Hmm.
McCartney, you
Okay.
could see through, I think, a little bit, quite a bit more. But
Interesting.
yeah, but they were honing, their skills in the interviews, and that took years to do. But they got it pretty much down, and it gets to be just a reaction.
Right.
Most of those press conferences, there's some valuable stuff in some of those press conferences, but generally speaking, it's a lot of nothingness.
Yeah, there was one press conference where I can't remember where it was because the information just comes into my head and it's so fresh there when I'm working on it, and then as soon as I'm done and I'm on to the next thing, all of it gets flushed out. But there was a press conference where a foreign press reporter um, challenged the Beatles for saying that, you're being disrespectful to, to us. You're being like, really uh sullen or whatever, and Paul kind of turned it back on them and was really serious about it. And it was a side of him that I don't think a lot of people are used to seeing. It's like this really obscure clip. At least it was obscure to me, but I happened to find it. Uh, um, and it was almost a little bit uncomfortable to see
Hmm.
to see the defensiveness, and actually Paul going on the offensive, but
Hmm.
also keeping his cool. So I was impressed by that as well. But you could see the pressure is getting to them. The pressure is really getting to them.
And Paul was the one who volunteered to handle some of those questions. And I think you're right. The pressure did get to him because he was taking most of those questions that he was trying to put the good spin on. And but
Yeah,
sometimes you can't do it. You just gotta. Yeah, there have been times I've seen Paul be very firm, curt perhaps, but
yeah,
firm with some of these people and say, "Look, um, just kind of putting them very gently in their place and not doing it respectfully."
yeah,
But because and some of these you got these. Remember this old geezer was like asking them question, and he
yeah,
didn't know what was going on. It's like you could. I can't imagine what it'd be like to have to sit at a hotel before the concert, every concert. And why even bother doing any press conferences? Why do any? They shouldn't have not done any. But that's just part of the game. And Epstein
yeah.
probably didn't want to rock the boat because
Right.
you don't want the press to turn on you. So.
What's some, I mean, so much has changed since then, because some of the questions that they were asked were so stupid, you know? I mean, the press has really gotten much better since then, in terms of asking
As
asking
far as asking
questions at a
questions,
press
yeah.
conference. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that was one of the reasons. And so, in fact, this is this is one clip on the 64 tour where this reporter, an older reporter who clearly did not do his homework and knows nothing about them, and he basically asked John, "Which one are you?" And John said, "I'm Eric." And he starts saying, "Well, Eric," and he goes, "No, no, I'm John." And now he didn't know whether what his name was at this point, because he gave him like three different names, and he would have believed anything the guy told him, you know.
Wow.
So it was just very fun. And that's actually one of the ones that was caught on film. And I was cracking up. It's like, and John's doing it with a straight face. "Which one are you?" "I'm Eric." "Well, Eric, no, I'm John." And the guy was just like, I don't know what to believe at this point. So yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
those are always fun. Some of those press conferences are very fun and they're very
yeah.
funny usually. I mean, there's some uncomfortable moments as well, and
Hmm.
there's some
Hmm.
boring stuff, but
Absolutely.
it's by the end it gets a little more painful, but you
Yeah.
can understand why.
Yeah. By 66, it was, the cat was out of the bag. John, actually, of all people, and this is in the book. It's actually at one point it was going to be the last line of the book, where John basically says, for everybody, because I feel bad for the people who won't get to see us. But the fact of the matter is, on most occasions, you probably wouldn't have heard us anyway. But on the occasions where you could have heard us, you probably would have had a good time.
That's a cool line.
Yeah, it's in the book. It was meant to be the last line, and then I had second thoughts, and it ends the way it does. But it is in there, and I'm happy about that. But John was the only one who kind of like put himself in the perspective of the fans who are never going to get to see the Beatles live, and or at least he said he could empathize with them, and that's something George never never would have done.
Yeah. It's always a fun ride, even when it gets bumpy with the Beatles. It's still a fun ride in many ways.
And I think, yeah, obviously this is no secret, and it's no great revelation, that even though Paul ultimately fell into line, he saw the value in connecting with the audience live, and he certainly did miss it. I think if there was, if do I think that they ever would have toured again had they not broken up? That's that's a tough question, but I'd like to think that had they stayed together, you know, if they could have been convinced that it would have been safe, that there wouldn't have been the insanity, that if it could be made easy for them, that maybe they could have done a live thing somewhere, a closed circuit kind of thing in an indoor stadium. They
Mhm.
didn't have to go to Tunisia.
Yeah, in a
Yeah,
perfect world, I think they probably could have done a farewell show.
yeah,
There would have been, I suppose, although Apple, depending on the shape it would have been in this fantasy world I'm creating here, they could have had it easier. They could have had it more comfortable and on their terms and do one show in the place of their choice to say goodbye. And I think that probably would have been good. I think that's probably all they would have had. Anything more than a single show, I think would have just been the
yeah,
money. And it's
yeah,
not that they wanted the money, which they would because you want to get paid for your work. But what else would there be to do? I
right,
mean, they had done everything. So
yeah.
that would have just cheapened it. But it ended that little concert on the rooftop was little something. So that I think was great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, growing up a second generation Beatles fan. So I grew up with all these books, whether it was the Philip Norman book, Shout was the first Beatles book I ever had. And then I read the Nicholas Schaffner book, The Beatles Forever, and I read, and as they were coming out, I was reading all of them. And so you do get some of these experts, quote unquote, or historians, scholars, whatever, saying that it was the end of touring that really was what broke up the Beatles because while they were touring, they were a unit. And they leaned on each other. And once that was over, and they started to, sort of drift away from each other, but they should never have stopped touring. And reading this, writing this book and reading it too, what I came away with is there was no way they weren't going to stop touring. There just was no way. They had to, for at least for a long period of time. And again, it opens up the question: well, had they stayed together, would they have done it again? Seeing how what other bands were doing in concert, Led Zeppelin, The Who, this even the Stones, what they were accomplishing on stage, with the Beatles, seeing what the Who and the Led Zeppelin were accomplishing circa 70, 71, you know, had the Beatles remained together, would they have like said, you know what, we could do something like that?
Yeah, I do watch a lot of live footage from that period, and I don't ever see the Beatles being able to really compete with that. I mean,
Interesting.
I mean, I they could have got up and played,
Mhm.
but if you watch the Who, which I've been watching quite a lot of Who video lately, that I can find,
Yeah,
and they were newer to the American audiences anyway. The Stones
sure.
were just getting back into it.
Hmm.
So it was kind of new for the Stones as well, because it was a different time to start
Hmm.
touring in 69, 70, or whenever they started to tour.
Hmm.
Much different than when they had last done it in 66.
Right.
So I don't know. I think the Beatles had almost just graduated from it completely. I mean, I don't know what they would have been limited in what they could even play unless they had some of the additional musicians, which they could have had. But it just doesn't seem like they would have gone that route. But I have no idea. I
Sure,
mean, one
sure.
of one of the things I think that they had no vision of it either.
Yeah. Agreed. And you go back and one of the other things that I thought was really interesting is just one of those things where you're trying to find consistency where consistency cannot exist. And so, the official story, the agreed upon narrative is, well, we gave up touring, and that allowed us to spend more time in the studio and craft these incredible songs that we never could have done, if we had to tour all the time. So we were able to like, do these grand productions like Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and then after that's done. you have George saying what a drag Sergeant Pepper's was, and John
Mhm.
saying what a drag Sergeant Pepper's was, and all that overproduced stuff, and they wanted to get away from all of that, and they really didn't have a plan. They didn't have any sort of like consistency in terms of, you know, even when they were doing what they claimed they wanted to be doing, they weren't happy.
Right. I think they, a couple things there. Because when you said that, it made total sense. So that you give them what they want and they don't like what they wanted. So I
Right.
think what's going on, part of it is that they were always trying to do something new. They got
Yeah.
bored very easily.
Yeah.
So with all that idle time in the studio during Sergeant Pepper, with orchestration and all that waiting around, I could see that getting old really quick.
Hmm.
But then the following year when they did the White Album, the double album, I mean, that was more to fulfill contractual, just to get a number of songs done to get out of their contract or to fulfill the contract.
Right.
They didn't have to do that. So they were saddling themselves again with extra work they didn't have. And then, of course, the Let It Be Get Back stuff, trying to do that all in like a month. I mean, they were really not, they were getting more and more unrealistic with some of the things that they chose to do,
Yeah.
none of which was touring.
Right.
That might have
Right.
been the easiest thing. You hire that you could actually hire a company to handle for you,
Right.
and they wouldn't have to really think of anything except for show up and just be
Yeah.
rehearsed.
Yeah.
And that never entered their mind.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you wish you can travel back in time and get to them and just try to offer them some sound advice that any manager in their right mind, any competent manager would try to explain to them. Now, it raises the speculation, like, could had Brian lived, could he have, you know, kept them on the right path, you know? Would they even listen to him at that point because they were so
Right.
full of themselves? But
Hmm.
boy, did they need guidance. And and one of the things that is a, pretty apparent is Brian knew touring was done. I mean, Brian knew that was actually one of the sources of his Great Depression, is without touring, what was he going to do? What use was he to them? Um, and it's but could he have steered them in a direction where they could have remained a unified front, you know?
Well, I
Um,
think that there would have been plenty for Brian Epstein to do. I mean,
I agree with
if they
you.
were
I agree
launching
with you.
Apple, I mean,
Exactly.
that would have been much harder than touring because
Exactly.
you're just fulfilling a contract and going home
Right.
as opposed to starting a whole company. So I think he would have had plenty to do.
Which
But
makes you wonder why Brian didn't realize that. You know what I mean?
well, I think he was an old school guy. I mean, he was so young. He died at
Yeah.
32, but I think
Right.
his this whole show business thing was still, for rock music, it was still very new. So
Hmm.
this was virgin ground they were going into here, but he was still in the mindset of, well, you got a tour,
Right.
and I think he made probably, well, they made good, excellent money. He made a lot of
Hmm.
money
Yeah.
doing that, and
Yeah.
he made the Beatles a lot of money doing that as well. So I think that was just an old show business thing. That's just what you did.
Right.
Just like all the PR that went along with it, you didn't, there was just kind of a thing that the Beatles had to kind of fall in line and do.
Right.
So I don't think he was thinking outside of that much.
Obviously not, because that's one of the that's one of my takeaways from the research that I've done, and also on the other books as well, is, you know, why did Brian think that they didn't need him anymore? I mean, they were going to need him as much as ever because they was launching their own company. He would have
Yeah.
been actively involved in that. Like, how could he think that they wouldn't
Well,
need
I
him?
think he suffered from some long-term depression, and all the pills did not help. The uppers
Yeah,
and downers, I mean, that'll just destroy you, and it
sure.
destroyed him.
Yeah,
And you get paranoid, and I don't think, yeah, I wish he could have lasted longer.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think had he been able to last longer, he would have always done right by them. They re-signed with him. I mean, there was an issue whether the Beatles were going to retain him, but I
Right.
don't see them. I didn't see a scenario where they would ever lose him.
Right. I
And
mean, Paul was having questions, and Paul was questioning some of the decisions and all that. But it's hard for me to think that John would have allowed them to sack Brian.
well, Paul got a little taste of what it's like to be a manager once Epstein was gone, so it was not so easy.
That's
I mean,
right.
it really is not easy. And
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, the suicidal tendencies of Brian Epstein. I mean, the
Yeah.
pressures of the job. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not we're great. So,
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah.
and by the way, you
But
do cover
yeah.
Brian in this bookazine quite a bit as well. So that is also good, very well balanced.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just on my end, I wanted to make sure that Brian was well represented. I think, one of the things, because you had mentioned stuff in there that you weren't aware of. I don't think I was aware that he actually offered to cancel the 66 tour and pay for it. But I totally
Yeah,
believe it.
I
He
didn't
was
know
that
that
kind of
either.
person. Yeah, he was going to cover all the costs out of his own pocket. And I guess somebody talked him down from that. But I totally believe it because he was that way.
Yeah, he was a really stand-up guy where the
Yeah.
Beatles were concerned. I mean, he really loved those guys and would have
Hmm.
done anything for them. So,
Yeah. And he
so
was
yeah,
very worried about them, very worried about them. I tried to find that kind of stuff wherever I could and make sure that it made it in. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that for the most part I put in the need to know basis because otherwise you can just watch the anthology on Disney Plus, or you can watch Beatles 64 or any of the other things. I didn't want to tell the sanitized, superficial story that you can get through all the official channels. And
yeah. Well,
I'm glad you
yeah,
think I
and
succeeded.
I'm very happy to have you on and talk and let people know that hey, here's something you can pick up for yourselves, and it'll some of the stuff you may know and it'll refresh your memory, but some of the photos you probably have not seen.
Yeah,
And I thought it was just the right amount, and it's not something that you're going to get bogged down and have to read over a number of days.
exactly.
And it just it's something a lot of people can share with you too. So yeah, I was really glad to see this. And as have been saying that, Beatle fans are looking for very good physical things to buy. And
Yeah,
I like books and I like
me too.
that stuff being on my shelves. I can always go back and research it because not everything's going to be online forever. I mean, that's just not how it works.
Right.
Things have to be hosted and things disappear all the time online. So it's always good to have a hard copy if it's something you really love.
I couldn't agree more. And some of the stuff that I did find online, I kept the links, and fingers crossed that if I ever need to consult them again, they'll still be there. I think when I get a chance, I think what I'm going to do is go back to those links and just print stuff out and stick them in a file somewhere. I mean, I don't have a lot of space anymore with all of my reference materials and research, but like you say, some of this stuff isn't going to be around online forever. And like that clip from New Music Express where I got it, and I got the quote and all that kind of stuff. And it's I want to be able to hold on to that kind of stuff because you never know when you're going to need it again. That's the thing
Yeah, that's true.
in my mind.
I've had some links that I've had disappear on me that I didn't
Yeah,
print out, or I oftentimes will copy and paste the entire article if I can with the link. And sometimes I need to sometimes I edit it down just for space.
yeah,
And I got to go back to the link, and sometimes it's not there, but
yeah,
I've got enough. But yeah, that happens all the time. So it's always a challenge to
yeah.
get the research done, and all the Beatle books are piling up. It's really hard to keep track of everything.
It is, and for the most part, I felt kind of vindicated because for the most part, I stick with print print research,
Mhm.
books because they are thoroughly researched before they go out. They have to be vetted by different different steps, layers when you're dealing with a book, especially a book through a reputable publishing company, which is what
Mhm.
I stick to. And I was recently, of all places, I was recently on the Turner Classic Movies cruise. And
Really?
yeah, and the hosts were all on this cruise. and so with the writing staff. And they talked about the kind of research that they do when they create the segments for the hosts, before they present, as they're presenting a movie. And they stress the fact they only use print reference materials,
That's good to
books,
hear.
articles. They do not do any online research.
Well,
And
Glenn,
yeah, yeah,
I think that this bookazine shows that you use very good stuff. I think that's why it's so good because you use actual print stuff.
yeah,
Well, one of the reasons I started my channel was because I got tired of this copy paste mentality where it just was the same thing over and over, very bland, not a lot of meat on the bone, some
yeah.
of it wrong. And the great thing about living in the digital age now is how much is not digitized because I have no idea what percent is not digitized, but
Hmm.
that's an advantage to people who can get their hands on that stuff and offer
Right,
some content that people who just use the internet can never do. And
right.
those are the lazy people. And there's
Yeah,
a lot of it. That's all AI can do as well. You can't open a book and pull out a quote from some obscure book. So those are things that I want to keep promoting on this channel and keep educating people and get people to continue to buy books and get them in your libraries and use those as own personal resources because they're great and you can read it on a beach. You don't need any electricity. You've got sunlight. You're good to go.
I support that attitude 100%.
All right. Well, let's break there. Where can people buy this bookazine?
I know for sure that you can get it at your local Barnes and Noble if you have one. You can probably also find it at supermarkets, grocery stores, pharmacies. They tend to carry these formats, bookazines. But for sure, I know Barnes and Noble carries them because I saw them just the other day. You can also order them online directly from the publisher. All you have to do is go to magazineshop.us, just type in Beatles, and you will find this bookazine and several of the others that I've written are still available, and some others that I didn't work on. But there's like three of mine there, and that would be this new one, The Beatles in America, The Touring Years, The Trivia Book of the Beatles, and The Beatles, The White Album. So those
Okay.
three all those three are still available, and there's some others there as well. But magazineshop.us, type in Beatles, and you're good to go.
I think this is one of the best things I've seen. So, yeah, let's go out and support this. And I'm sure once you page through it in the store, you're going to see what I mean, and you're gonna buy it.
I hope so. Thanks in advance.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it turned out so well. And yeah, until next time, we have you on for your next bookazine. And it seems like your publisher is really they liked this format, and they seem to be believe in it, and they seem
Yeah,
to be popular.
yeah,
So there's something for you. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't being bought.
exactly. And so that's why I'm doing my best to get the word out about it because I want to see more. I want to do more, and keep the spirit alive.
And again, this is also perfect things to get into new Beatle fans' hands
Yeah,
and people that are kind of entry level and casual fans. This is a perfect way for them to go a little deeper without too much effort.
agreed.
All right, Glenn. Well, thanks again for joining me, and we'll be back here on Pop Goes the 60s with another interview and another video on one of your favorite bands. So check back. Thanks for watching.